The British Grand Prix always seems to deliver, and this year was no different. We saw a surprise team near the front of qualifying. We saw some decent race pace, and of course, the inevitability of Max Verstappen. This is the 2023 British Grand Prix around the Silverstone circuit, and we're going to talk about what happened. We're going to talk about the winners and losers for the weekend, as well as go over my predictions that I made before the weekend began and see how I did. It was a up and down weekend from start to finish, a little bit of tricky conditions before the race started, and at the end, it was another Grand Prix in the books in this 2023 season of Formula One. But let's go ahead, let's jump on into it. What's going on, guys? I'm Dakota, and welcome in to this British Grand Prix weekend recap. We are going to begin with my weekend quick hits, a little bit of sprinkling of qualifying results, but the bulk of it is going to be about the race itself. Let's go ahead. Let's talk about qualifying and see what happened. One of the big stories of qualifying, obviously, is Sergio Perez out in Q1. Some tricky changing conditions in Q1 saw a surprising turn of events with Sergio Perez ending up out once again in Red Bull, failing to reach Q3 for, I believe, the fifth time in a row in a Red Bull that has proven to be more dominant than many that we've seen recently. It was a surprising result, especially for someone like me who made a bold prediction when it came to Checo around Silverstone, but nonetheless, it was very surprising and realistically is a very, very, very disappointing result for the Mexican driver. But moving on, another major weekend-long thing that we saw was the ability of Williams to kind of put it up near the top. Alex Albon in all three practice sessions put it in the top three, including a P2 in FP3 on the last day, and even Logan Sargent getting in on the action with a P5 finish on one session, and I believe a P7 session in another session. And so a very, very good weekend for Williams. In qualifying, Alex Albon makes it into Q3. Another fantastic qualifying performance from Albano. Logan, unfortunately, another one of those that just was taken about the tricky conditions, the changing conditions, and wasn't able to get the most out of that Williams. But nonetheless, a very solid qualifying performance from Williams. But I think the biggest story of qualifying has to be, obviously, McLaren. Lando Norris putting it on the front row of the grid. Oscar Piastri rounding out the top three following the pole position of Max Verstappen. McLaren had an absolutely joyous Saturday as they showed a real pace around Silverstone, and really it was one of the more impressive qualifying sessions I think we've seen this year. And it should be said that And I put this to Twitter after, I believe it was after qualifying on Saturday, that where would McLaren be now if they had this car at the beginning of the season, which I believe I remember Zach Brown saying that they were hoping to have this version of the car in Bahrain in round one. So imagine where they would be now if they had actually managed to deliver this car at the beginning of the season. It would have been a lot of fun to follow, but I'm still excited to see where McLaren can go from here. Moving forward now, let's talk about the race itself. Lando ends up taking the lead, and for about 4.5 laps, I would say, actually led the British Grand Prix to the delight of the home British fans. It was a lovely opportunity, and even Oscar Piastri got a little fighty there in the opening lap before ultimately settling into P3. Obviously, Max is a little bit inevitable. Lando did manage to break DRS briefly, but it did not last, and Max was able to walk out to a lead and kind of never really gave it up. So it is what it is. Obviously, even in the race itself, the biggest story is definitely McLaren, a P2 and P4 finish for Lando and Oscar, respectively. Lando gets on the podium again, and I believe the first time on the podium at his home race. And so what a weekend for McLaren, who I think it's probably safe to say that this is their best weekend they've had in F1, maybe since Monza 2021. McLaren, we've kind of just been waiting to see what they were going to do at the beginning of the year. We saw them fighting with Alpine last season for the position of best of the rest, and they come in this season with an absolute stinker. But they are quickly developing the car and getting some real pace out of that McLaren. So it was a great, great weekend for the Papaya squad. Mercedes had a bit of a downer in terms of practice and qualifying. They a little further down the order than I think they would have enjoyed, but at the end of the day, they actually showed very, very good race pace in this one. Lewis making his way through the field very easily, and even George taking a set of softs well past where many thought they could, and on their way to a very, very impressive P3 and P5 finish for Mercedes. They definitely need to get their qualifying pace figured out, but at the end of the day, race pace is what scores points, and they got a really good batch of points today with one podium and one P5 finish. Obviously, I think George got a little caught out with the safety car late, but that is going to be what happens sometimes. Lewis was the benefactor in this instance, but still, P3, P5 finish, not too shabby. Moving on down the order, Aston Martin. What happened? Where did you go? This is 2 weekends in a row where Aston really was nowhere to be found, and you could even argue 3, as in Canada, outside of Alonso finishing P2, Lance was nowhere to be found, and I think that might have been just Alonso in Canada more than anything. So we can call it 2.5 weekends in a row where Aston Martin doesn't look particularly quick, and I don't see a lot of hope on the horizon, as we don't know how much money they've already spent this season to get to where they are on the grid currently. So Aston Martin, I think you're kind of teetering in the danger zone. That's not where you want to be. As the next team we're going to talk about has found out, Ferrari, disaster, and really they only have their own frustrations to show for it. They qualify P4, P5, and then they end up P9, P10. They make some interesting strategy calls. I mean, they were defending themselves after the fact, but they ended up pitting Charles Leclerc, I think, on lap 17, going onto the hard tires. And even under the safety car, they end up putting the wrong tires on, I think, in the end. And they kind of fall down the order. And before you know it, they're P9, P10, scrapping for points. Any points that they can get at this point. They even had Albon absolutely having them in actual race conditions, and I don't know what happened to Ferrari, but they need to get it figured out quick, or it could be a long rest of the season in Maranello. Speaking of Williams, we kind of touched on them in qualifying, but what a performance this weekend by Williams. Albon finishing in the points, and Logan just outside the points. P11 with his best result of the year. It's mighty impressive from both of them. Logan was very, very close to scoring points, but I think it was just a little too late. And this circuit kind of does tend to turn into a tire management simulator by the end. But thanks to a 5-second penalty by Lance Stroll, Logan ends up finishing P11, Albon in the points. What a weekend for Williams, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of talk this week as we head to Hungary about what they've been able to do in that car. In the last couple of teams I'll touch on, tough days for Haas and Alpine. Haas and Alpine both had one car retire due to mechanical failure. Kevin Magnussen's engine basically ends up exploding, and I think Esteban Ocon had a hydraulic failure, if I'm remembering correctly. Alpine also had Pierre Gasly DNF from this one, but that's more thanks to Lance Stroll breaking Pierre's rear suspension and forcing them to retire the car. What a rough day for Alpine. Even Haas, Nico Hülkenberg wasn't also immune from the dangers of Silverstone, as Sergio Perez ends up breaking Nico's front wing pretty early on, forcing Nico to pit to replace that wing pretty early. And he ended up finishing P13, but at the end of the day, that was pretty doomed from the beginning, and it was very, very tough. But those are the quick hits. Next, we're going to talk about the weekend winners and the weekend losers, and I think it'll be pretty obvious that we're going to pick, but let's go ahead. Let's move over to that now. We move on now to our weekend winners and losers, and realistically, we don't need to spend too much time on this. We'll begin with my weekend winners, and I think it goes without saying, McLaren, an easy decision. It was an obvious choice, a front row start and a podium for Lando, and a second row start and a second row finish for Oscar Piastri. What a day for McLaren. What a weekend for McLaren. I think we're excited to see what they can do going forward. Is it a flash in the pan at the British Grand Prix, or are we actually going to see McLaren up near the front fighting with the likes of Aston Martin, Mercedes, Ferrari? Williams is starting to get up there as well too. It's going to be an exciting rest of the season, and I for one can't wait to see it. But McLaren, congratulations. You are my winners for the British Grand Prix weekend. But I am going to give a special shout out to Williams as well. If McLaren hadn't performed quite like this, Williams would have been an easy choice. Albon in the points, Logan Sargent P11 for his best finish in Formula One so far. Yes, it wasn't points, but it was very, very close. And with a slightly better qualifying day on Saturday, Logan could have been there along with Alex. They showed some great pace this weekend, and I, for one, am excited to see Williams take a step forward as well. So is the top half of this grid getting a little top heavy? Is it clumping up nicely? Who knows? But I, for one, can't wait to see what happens next. And then for my weekend losers, I think I'm going to go with Ferrari. I really went back and forth with Alpine, but one was a mechanical failure. One was a Lance Stroll Canadian incident. But I think Ferrari really is the big losers here. Started P4 and P5 and finished 9th and 10th. How many times are we going to see Ferrari make these strategy calls that just ultimately do not work out? I know that they're making it with the best intentions, and I know they're not doing them on purpose, but we're seeing some very odd things come out of that Ferrari camp, and I mean, it has to be frustrating as a Ferrari fan. I can only imagine. To the Tifosi and the Ferrari fans, I promise you from the bottom of my heart, we are rooting for you. For you specifically, maybe not Ferrari, but we are rooting for you to finally have something go well and go right for you guys. It is got to be frustrating, and we are with you. But Ferrari, unfortunately, yes, you still finished with 2 double points, but at the end of the day, 9th and 10th, is that really where you want to be? I don't think so. And then finally, for this recap, we're going to go over the predictions that I made before the race weekend began. And to go over my predictions again, we made a prediction for biggest positive surprise, biggest disappointment, our qualifying top 3, our race podium, and being this channel, we make our Haas prediction of the race weekend. But starting at the top with my biggest positive surprise, it's sad to say, but I went very bold. I went Sergio Perez. After a long time and a lot of race weekends in a row of some disappointing results, I really thought that after Austria and some positive things that happened while qualifying may not have gone well, the race pace Checo showed was really good, and I thought Checo might be able to turn it around. Unfortunately, a Q1 exit and only a P6 finish is just not going to get it done. Out in Q1, only finishing P6 in the best F1 car we might have ever seen. That ain't it, Checo. So unfortunately, something I really thought I was going to get an easy point on is no points. I cannot give myself points for that. A Q1 exit and only P6 in that car. Nah, ain't gonna happen. Moving on, though, to our biggest disappointment pick. I will say, I'll start off by saying I've never been so happy to be wrong. Going into the weekend, the vibes in the universe and in my soul were pointing to Williams having a tough weekend. And so I reluctantly went with Williams as my pick for biggest disappointment. It was all lining up. Good results in Austria. They're going into celebrating their 800th Grand Prix. It was all setting up for be extremely disappointing. And you know what? They went out and they proved me wrong from literally Friday through Sunday. So happily and joyously, I will take no points here. Williams, congratulations. You overcame my curse, which apparently is no longer that good. But Williams, good job. No points for me. Biggest disappointment. You were fantastic. Moving ahead to my qualifying results predictions. P3, I had Sergio Perez. Definitely not a Q1 exit. Had that one nixed from the beginning. P2, I actually had Charles Leclerc. I thought Ferrari was going to do a little better, have a little more pace around Silverstone like they did last year. Unfortunately, Charles couldn't get it all hooked up, and the emergence of McLaren really helps drive that one down. So unfortunately, I'm 0-2 so far. But of course, I have my banker, Max Verstappen, taking pole position. That's 1 point out of 3 for qualifying. I'm taking my banker every single week at this point, and no one is still proving me wrong. But unfortunately, my P2 and P3, very wrong. So we move on, and that's only 1 out of 3 for me there. But moving ahead, once again, to my race results. And once again, my banker point of Max Verstappen winning the race is come to fruition, because of course he did. So my one banker for my race results is locked and loaded. And I thought it was actually going to be a bit pretty same old, same old. So coming off my qualifying predictions, I had a Sergio Perez P2 and a Charles Leclerc P3. And I don't know if I could have gotten more wrong out of this than anything else. Obviously, Lewis finishing on the podium at P3 and Lando Norris a P2 around Silverstone. So once again, 1 for 3 in my predictions when it comes to picking 3 drivers I think are going to do well. So less good. Less good, that's to say the least. So we go again next week, and hopefully we'll do a little better. And then finally, my Haas predictions of the race weekend. I actually went into this weekend a little bit excited. Coming out of Austria, we saw some positive results, and I was hoping that we'd be able to come to Silverstone and at least do a little better in qualifying. I predicted 2 cars into Q2. Nico obviously did make it, so I'm giving myself a half point with that one. I predicted 1 car into Q3 because Nico has been on fire in qualifying. Unfortunately, that did not come true, so that's no points in that one. And I also predicted no points in the Grand Prix. And so realistically, I went 0.5 out of 3. So no, 1.5 out of 3. I did math wrong. I can count, I promise. And so I finished with a grand total across all of my predictions, 3.5 out of 11 total points. It could have been a lot better for me. I had been doing pretty well the last couple of times out, but apparently I got a little too bold in my predictions this weekend. We'll try and rein it in a little more as we head to Hungary in not but a week from now. I'm looking forward to it, but that is my results for the predictions that I made for this weekend. Guys, there it is. The 2023 British Grand Prix weekend has come and gone. What did you think of the race this weekend in Silverstone? It was an exciting day if you're a McLaren fan or a Williams fan. Maybe not so much if you are a Sergio Perez fan or a Ferrari fan. It was the highs were high, the lows were low. It was a very fun weekend, as it seems the British Grand Prix always is. I really, really enjoyed it. If I was going to give it a rating out of 10, I'd give it a 7.5 out of 10. It definitely turned into a bit of tire management simulator at some points, but a late safety car really spiced things up and made things pretty exciting. But that will do it for me here. We head to Hungary very, very quickly. A quick turnaround once again as they head to Hungary in the Hungaroring. But that is it for this weekend. If you are a Formula One fan, hit that subscribe button down below. And if you want to let me know how you did with your predictions before the weekend started, let me know down in the comments. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any future uploads from me. And guys, we'll see you in a few days as I'm making my predictions for the Hungarian Grand Prix next week. But for now, I'll see you guys in the next one.